I've kept this to myself for years because even now I don't fully understand what happened out there, and the more I replay it in my head, the worse it feels. This was back when I was around 25 or 26, long before I settled down, back when I had the kind of freedom and recklessness that doesn't make sense to me anymore. I used to go on solo backpacking trips deep into the Appalachians, driving out to remote trailheads and hiking far beyond where most people would go, completely off-grid, no signal, no contact. Just me and the woods. I loved it, or at least I thought I did. This particular trip took me into the Cherokee National Forest, and it was supposed to be just another few days of isolation, but it ended up being the last time I ever went out there alone. The first 2 days were perfect, quiet trails, clear weather, not a single person in sight after the first morning, exactly what I wanted. But by the afternoon of the second day, everything changed. I noticed storm clouds building fast, darker than anything I had seen that trip. And within an hour, the temperature dropped hard, the wind picked up violently. And I realized this wasn't going to pass quickly. The rain hit like a wall, turning into a full downpour in minutes, the kind that soaks you instantly, and the wind started bending trees, snapping branches somewhere above me. Lightning cracked close enough that I could feel it in my chest, and suddenly being alone out there didn't feel peaceful anymore, it felt exposed. I kept moving, completely drenched, scanning for any kind of shelter, anything that would get me out of the storm, and then I saw it. Through the trees, partially hidden, a small structure. As I got closer, I realized it was a cabin, old, barely standing, the kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten decades ago. I didn't think twice. I ran to it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. It was dark, damp, and smelled like rot, but it was dry, and that was all that mattered. There was barely anything inside. A chair, a small table, a cot frame, and a fireplace clogged with ash, but I didn't care. I stripped out of my soaked clothes and dropped to the floor, just trying to get warm. At that point, I wasn't thinking about anything except surviving the storm. But after about 10 or 15 minutes, once the initial panic wore off, I started looking around. And that's when things started to feel wrong. There was a sleeping bag in the corner that didn't look nearly as old as the rest of the cabin. There were cans and water jugs on the table, signs that someone had been there recently, not years ago. That alone was enough to make me uneasy, but then I noticed the marks on the wall near the door. At first, I thought they were just damage, but when I got closer, I realized they were scratches. Dozens of them, deep, uneven, frantic, not random wear, something intentional, something desperate. I checked the door next. The latch was simple, nothing unusual, but when I opened it and looked at the frame, I saw the bracket for a lock was on the outside. Only the outside. There was no way to secure it from within. That meant if someone locked that door, it wasn't to keep people out, it was to keep someone in. I shut the door slowly and turned toward the window. The glass was intact, which didn't make sense for a place this old until I saw the screws, one in each corner drilled in from the outside, sealing it shut. Around the edges of the frame, more scratches, deeper this time, like someone had clawed at it, trying to force it open with their bare hands. That's when it hit me. Someone had been trapped in that cabin, held there, and whatever happened, it wasn't good. I should have left right then, but the storm outside was still raging, louder than ever, and I convinced myself it was all old, something that had happened years ago, so I stayed. Time passed, maybe an hour, maybe more. It was impossible to tell with the storm drowning out everything. And then I heard it, a faint scraping sound along the outside wall. At first, I told myself it was just a branch, but I couldn't remember seeing anything close enough to hit the cabin. Then came 2 heavy thumps on the porch. Not wind, not debris, something else. I froze, completely still, trying to listen over the roar of the rain. My eyes drifted toward the window, but I couldn't bring myself to look through it. If someone was out there, they could be staring right back at me. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks on me, until I heard it again. This time it was different, pressure on the door. Slow, heavy, like someone leaning their full weight against it from the outside. The wood creaked, the latch rattled once, then it stopped. And in that moment, something clicked in my head that I can't explain. If someone was outside, why weren't they coming in? The door wasn't locked. Nothing was stopping them. Unless they didn't want to come in, unless they wanted me inside, the realization hit me like a punch. Everything I had seen inside that cabin, the scratches, the locked window, the outside latch, it all pointed to one thing. That cabin wasn't shelter, it was a trap. I didn't wait any longer. I started throwing my things into my pack as fast as I could, my hands shaking, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to get out. I was maybe seconds away from opening the door when the window behind me exploded. Glass shattered inward and something came flying through, and before I could even process what it was, flames erupted. Instantly, violently. The entire room lit up, fire spreading across the walls like it had been waiting to happen. The heat hit me like a physical force, knocking the breath out of me. I ran for the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't move. It was jammed from the outside. Panic took over. I slammed into it with everything I had again and again until it finally gave way, breaking open and sending me crashing onto the ground outside. I scrambled up and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The rain, the fire, the smoke, everything blurred together as I pushed through the woods, trying to put distance between me and that cabin. But I didn't get far before something hit me from behind. Hard. I went down instantly, and suddenly there was someone on top of me. A person, real, breathing, screaming. We fought in the mud, slipping, clawing. He was trying to choke me, digging into my face, my eyes, and I felt myself starting to lose strength, starting to fade, but somehow I managed to push him off. I didn't wait. I got up and ran again, faster than I ever have in my life. Behind me, I could hear him screaming, this unhinged, animal-like sound that I'll never forget. I looked back once and saw the cabin fully engulfed in flames, a burning shape in the darkness, and then I kept running until my body couldn't take it anymore. I collapsed under fallen trees, barely sheltered from the rain, shaking uncontrollably, my body numb, my mind barely functioning. I don't know how long I stayed there, hours maybe. Time didn't exist anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to move because staying meant dying. I stumbled through the woods blindly until I found a trail and followed it, step by step, until I reached a trailhead. The storm had passed by then. The first person I saw drove me to a hospital. I had burns on my arm and neck, cuts, bruises, but I survived. The doctors told me I was lucky. They had no idea how lucky. I told the police everything I could, but nothing came of it. There was no trail, no evidence, no suspect. Just a burned cabin somewhere deep in the forest and a story that sounds impossible. But I know what happened. Someone set that place up. Someone used it before, and that night they tried to use it again. And if I had stayed even a few seconds longer, I wouldn't be here telling this story. My name is James, and this happened around 7 or 8 years ago when I was in my early 20s. Back when I was still doing things I probably shouldn't have been doing and saying yes to ideas that, looking back now, make absolutely no sense. I had this friend Charles who was kind of infamous in our group for finding places you weren't supposed to go. Abandoned factories, empty buildings, forgotten structures deep in the woods. And somehow he always knew exactly how to get in. He spent hours scrolling through satellite maps and obscure forums, constantly sending screenshots of random locations he wanted to explore. And while most of our friends would just laugh it off and say it sounded insane, I was usually the one who said yes without thinking too much about it. That was kind of our dynamic. He found the risk and I followed him into it. Most of the time it led to some great memories, but a few times it led to situations that I still can't fully explain, and this is one of them. One weekend, Charles texted me about a fire lookout tower he had found deep in some forest a few hours away. I don't remember the exact location, which honestly bothers me now, but he told me it had been decommissioned years ago and was just sitting out there untouched. His plan was simple. We hike out, climb it, and spend the night at the top. At the time, the idea sounded insane, but also weirdly exciting. Being that high above a forest with nothing around you, no lights, no people, just silence, so I agreed. We drove out early Friday morning, about 3 hours, and by the time we reached the woods, it was already afternoon. The hike itself wasn't too bad, but it was completely off trail, which made everything feel more isolated the deeper we went. I honestly didn't think we'd find it, but then suddenly, through the trees, it appeared. This tall, rusted structure rising out of nowhere like it didn't belong there anymore. When we got closer, it was even worse than I expected. No fences, no warning signs, nothing stopping anyone from climbing it. The metal was worn, some railings bent or missing, graffiti near the base, and the whole thing looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I hesitated, but Charles didn't. He was already climbing before I could even say anything. After a second, I followed. Every step felt unstable. Some of the bolts were rusted through, a few stairs shifted under our weight, and the higher we got, the more exposed it felt. The worst part was the final ladder section near the top. Just a vertical climb inside a narrow metal cage with open air behind you. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the top, but somehow we made it. The view was unreal. You could see for miles in every direction, endless forests stretching out under the setting sun. We sat on the walkway, cracked a few beers, and just took it all in. For a moment, it felt worth it. But that feeling didn't last long. Once the sun went down, everything changed. The forest below us disappeared into complete darkness. There were no lights anywhere, no signs of life, just a black void in every direction. It felt wrong in a way I can't really explain. Charles could tell I was getting uneasy, so he started messing with me, grabbing my shoulder, trying to get a reaction, until he did something that instantly killed whatever calm I had left. He slammed his metal bottle against the tower. The sound that came from that was insane. It echoed through the entire forest, this loud, hollow metallic clang that felt like it traveled for miles. I remember getting genuinely angry at him, telling him to stop, because in that moment it felt like we had just announced our presence to anything out there. We went inside the cab after that. It was empty, just a small room with windows on all sides, nothing left inside. He stayed outside for a bit to finish his drink while I started setting up my sleeping stuff. Then he called me back out, but this time his voice was different. Quiet, serious, not joking. I walked back around and saw him pointing down into the forest. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then I did, a light, far away, moving between the trees. My first thought was that someone had heard the noise and was coming toward us. I whispered that we were probably about to get caught, but Charles didn't agree. He said the light wasn't moving like a person. And once he said that, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't swinging or bouncing like a flashlight or lantern would. It was steady, too steady, like it was gliding through the forest. We stood there watching it in silence, and slowly it got closer. Then something happened that I still can't explain. The light suddenly moved forward in a quick, unnatural jump, like it skipped distance, then went back to its normal slow movement again. That's when the fear really hit. There was no explanation for that. None. We didn't talk much after that, we just watched. And after about 10 minutes, it reached the base of the tower. It stopped directly below us. From where we were, we could see the light clearly, but we couldn't see anything holding it. That didn't make sense. From that angle, we should have seen someone. But there was nothing, just the light. Charles, being who he was, decided to yell down at it, asking if whoever was there was okay. I couldn't believe he did that. I was expecting something to respond immediately, but nothing happened. The light didn't move, no voice, no reaction, it just stayed there. We waited, watching it, completely stuck because the tower only had one way down. After a while, I tried shining my flashlight down, but it didn't help. It didn't reveal anything. Just darkness surrounding that light. Eventually, the light disappeared, not slowly, not moving away, just gone, and that was worse, because now we had no idea where it was. Charles tried to say whoever it was probably left, but I didn't believe that for a second. The idea that something was still down there and we just couldn't see it anymore was way more terrifying. I told him we needed to stay inside the cab, and he agreed. We set up inside, but neither of us even tried to sleep. About 20 minutes later, we started hearing sounds, metallic sounds. Loud enough to echo through the structure, not footsteps, something else, like metal hitting metal, then a grinding sound, long and slow, like something being twisted or pulled apart. The sounds came from different parts of the tower, and that's what made it worse. It meant whatever was down there was moving around. We whispered about what we would do if someone started climbing up, but the truth was we had no plan. Then I saw it. A dark shape passed across one of the windows, fast, too fast. My brain didn't process it at first, but then it passed the next window too, and that's when I reacted. I yelled, and both of us ran to the door, pressing our backs against it, ready to hold it shut if something tried to come in. We stayed like that for hours, not moving, not speaking much. Just listening, waiting. The night felt endless. When the sun finally started to come up, I forced myself to open the door. There was no one there. We checked around the tower. Nothing. We started climbing down as fast as we could, but halfway down, Charles stopped. I looked past him and saw it. A section of the staircase was completely missing. Not broken, not damaged, removed. Clean, like someone had taken it apart during the night. That's when everything clicked. Those sounds we heard, that's what they were doing. But that didn't make sense either, because those sounds continued after I saw the figure. So how did they cross that gap? Twice? In the dark, we had no choice but to jump across. It wasn't far, but it was enough to be dangerous. Charles twisted his ankle, but we made it down. At the bottom, there was nothing, no tools, no metal, no person, just empty forest. We didn't stay. We left as fast as we could, and to this day, I still don't know what we saw out there, not the light, not the figure. And definitely not how someone could dismantle part of a tower right below us, without us ever really seeing them. My name is James, and I've been camping alone for almost 15 years, ever since my early 20s, long enough to understand the risks and long enough to know when something doesn't feel right. Which is exactly why I always carry a rifle on solo trips. Because out there, especially in places like the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky, you are truly on your own. Miles away from anyone, deep in over 700,000 acres of wilderness where you can walk for days and never see another person. And 2 years ago, after a rough stretch of work and needing to clear my head, I decided to head out there for 3 nights, just me, my gear, and the woods, something I had done countless times before without incident. But this time was different from the very beginning, even if I didn't realize it yet. I drove out early Thursday morning, parked at a remote trailhead off a Forest Service road, and started hiking with a simple plan: cover ground, find a quiet place, set up camp, and disconnect from everything. And the first day went exactly as expected. I hiked about 7 miles before finding a flat spot near a creek bed, set up my tent, gathered wood, got a fire going just as the sun started to drop, cooked some food, had a beer, and let the fire burn down while I sat there in the quiet. No sounds except the creek and the occasional shift in the trees. I didn't see a single person all day. And I fell asleep around 10, feeling completely at peace. But sometime in the middle of the night, something woke me, not a sound exactly. More like my brain just snapped awake the way it sometimes does when you're somewhere unfamiliar. And I lay there staring at the inside of my tent until my eyes adjusted enough to notice something that shouldn't have been there: a faint orange glow bleeding through the fabric. And when I unzipped the tent and looked out about 200 yards away through the trees, there was a fire, not a forest fire, not something spreading, just a controlled campfire flickering steadily. And I watched it for several minutes, waiting to hear voices, movement, anything that would confirm someone was there. But there was nothing, no talking, no footsteps. Just the fire burning quietly in the distance, and I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another camper who had set up late and gone to sleep. Maybe someone careless leaving their fire unattended. It wasn't impossible, so I watched it a little longer, then zipped my tent back up and forced myself to sleep. But it stayed in the back of my mind, and when morning came, it was the first thing I thought about, not because I was scared, but because something about it didn't sit right. So after packing up, I hiked toward where I had seen it, and after about 10 minutes, I reached what I was sure was the spot, a clearing that matched the distance and angle perfectly. But when I got there, I stopped dead because there was nothing, no fire pit, no ashes, no burned wood, no disturbed ground, nothing at all. The clearing looked untouched, like no one had been there in months, and I walked the entire area trying to find any sign I had been wrong. But there wasn't a single indication that a fire had ever existed there, and I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. But eventually I convinced myself I must have misjudged the location and moved on because the alternative didn't make sense, and I still had 2 nights left, so I kept hiking deeper into the forest. The terrain rising, the trees growing taller, the canopy thicker, the air quieter in a way that felt heavy rather than peaceful, and by late afternoon I found another campsite and set up again. And that evening was uneventful, almost too normal. I put out my fire around 9 and went to sleep, but sometime during the night, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. A violent cracking noise that ripped me out of sleep instantly, followed by a deep, resonant thud that I could feel through the ground, and I knew immediately what it was: a tree falling. Something massive breaking under force, and while it didn't scare me at first, it confused me because there was no wind, no storm, nothing that would explain it. And as I lay there trying to process it, less than 10 minutes later it happened again, louder this time, closer, from a completely different direction, another massive crack followed by a crash. And that's when fear started to creep in, because 2 trees don't just fall like that in calm conditions, not in different directions, not without cause, and I sat up, fully alert now, trying to come up with any explanation that made sense. But before I could, I heard something else, something that made everything worse, a low, continuous sound like a deep groan mixed with a growl. Unnatural, sustained, deliberate, not an animal I recognized, not anything I had ever heard before, and it didn't stop. It just continued for what felt like a full minute, steady and controlled. Like whatever was making it wanted to be heard, and at that point, instinct took over. I grabbed my rifle, chambered a round as quietly as I could, and aimed it toward the tent opening. My heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I sat there like that for what must have been 20 minutes as the sound slowly faded into the distance. Not stopping suddenly, but tapering off like whatever made it was moving away, and the forest returned to silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt wrong, heavy. Like something had changed, and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just waited for daylight, and the moment the sun came up, I packed everything as fast as I could, still shaken. Still trying to convince myself I had overreacted. But I needed to see that tree, the second one, the closer one, so I moved toward it with my rifle ready, and after about 10 minutes I found it. A massive trunk lying across the ground, branches scattered everywhere, proof that what I heard was real. But when I got closer and looked at the stump, that's when everything stopped making sense. Because the break wasn't natural, it wasn't clean or splintered the way wind damage looks. The wood had been torn apart, gouged, shredded in long, irregular grooves. Some deep enough to fit my finger into, and the bark around the base had been peeled away in strips. The exposed wood underneath marked the same way, like something had worked on it aggressively. Deliberately, until the tree gave way, and I had no explanation for it. Nothing I had ever seen matched that kind of damage, and that's when a feeling hit me. Something primal telling me I needed to leave immediately. And as I started backing away, something near the fallen branches caught my eye, a small cluster of items on the ground. And when I got closer, my stomach dropped because they were mine, a blue bandana and a carabiner, items that had been in my pack, and I didn't need to check to know they were missing. But I did anyway, and they were gone, and in that moment, everything clicked in the worst possible way. Something had been near me, close enough to go through my things. Close enough to take something without me knowing, and I didn't think. I just grabbed my pack and ran, not caring if it made noise, not caring if it drew attention. I just needed to get out. And the entire hike back felt wrong. Every sound behind me felt like something following. Every shadow felt like movement, and I kept my rifle ready the entire time, expecting something to come out of the trees at any second. And when I finally reached my car around 3 in the afternoon, I didn't stop. I got in and drove as fast as I could, and once I had signal, I called the police, knowing they probably wouldn't believe me. And they didn't, not really, but I didn't care, because whatever was out there, whatever I experienced, it wasn't normal. And it wasn't safe, and even now I can't explain it. Not the fire that left no trace, not the trees that looked torn apart. And definitely not how something could have gone through my belongings without me ever hearing it. And that's the part that stays with me, the idea that whatever it was, it knew exactly where I was the entire time.